So from the individual perspective of one car manufacturer, we're now going to go macro and talk about why exponential mobilization of leading companies and countries is needed indeed to speed up change and to win the clean economy. So let's move on and talk about this. With me I have Johan Falk. You are CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and you're next to me here in the studio. And on Zoom, I have two prominent guests. I have Catherine McKenna, and it's wonderful to have Catherine McKenna here on Zoom with us. She is CEO Climate and Nature Solutions and former Minister of Environment and Climate from Canada. So warm welcome to you, Catherine McKenna. And also next to her on our Zoom screen here, we have Johan Rockström, Professor in Environmental Science and Director of Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Wonderful to have you with us here, Johan Rockström.
Yeah,
so I'm turning now first in this panel to Johan Falk here. Why is it so important to mobilize companies and countries at this point in time when it comes to implementing transition plans and scale up climate solutions? Also, of course, to phase out the fossil fuels. Why is this crucial right now?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, we have a common mission to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. We bring together some of the leading transformative and disruptive companies on the planet, and we require all of them to disclose high integrity transition plans and assessing them. What it means practically is halving value chains emissions by 2030 towards net zero by 2040, which is about the energy and material transformation and fossil phase out. It's also about scaling up climate solutions and contributing to climate action in society. And a big part of them are reasonably well on track, the first step, but they will not succeed unless we don't accelerate the green demand. So we really need strong NDCs also backed by transition plans from countries for every sector, because these two have to come together to win.
Thank you, Johan Falk. Turning now to Johan Rockström, could you please give us a short run through of the state, the health of the planet, and also, of course, your views on how strong corporate and national plans and how these connect to solving this problem?
Well, we know that it's really important to recognize that we met in 2009 to solve this problem and failed. 6 years later, we celebrated the Paris Agreement in 2015, the framework to hold global mean temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. The science since then shows that this is a critical limit to avoid crossing irreversible tipping points. Have we made progress? The answer is, unfortunately, at the aggregate level, no. So we are today on a very steep slope. We have only 4 or 5 years to cut global emissions by half. It's a 7.5% reduction per year to have any chance of holding the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit open. It means that for next year, in 2025, task number 1 is the following: to remove 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the global economy. That is nothing else but exponential. And of course, policy is absolutely essential here, but so is finance, and so is business, and so is particularly innovation. And I just want to put the finger on one thing now that we have a new Trump administration in the US. We have this sense of backing down on ambitions. One thing we've learned is the following: the only way to really go fast, to really scale at an exponential pace, is not only that we get the right policies in place and the right investments in place, it has to come out as being a winning strategy. It has to be something that citizens feel is better than the previous way of transporting yourself, a way of consuming, a way of building. And that is what the Exponential Roadmap really is about, to align with science through innovation, but also come out as the winner in the other end. And I think that is what we have to focus on and communicate, because we have all the empirical evidence that this is possible to do.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Johan Rockström. And turning now to Catherine McKenna, you have worked as a minister in Canada, and you've also been chair of the UN High-Level Expert Group, which is urging for exactly this, for high-level, high-integrity transition plans. So drawing from your experience, Catherine McKenna, what are your reflections on what you just heard here from Johan Falk and from Johan Rockström on the opportunity to align the corporate plans and the national transition plans?
Well, it's great to be on, and it's great to be with the two Johans. So look, it's critically important. As Johan Rockström just said, like, we don't have time. We need exponential change. And the reality is we have the solutions and we know how serious the crisis is. But when I was minister, I'll give one example. We needed to bring in a price on pollution, carbon pricing, because if it's free to pollute, you will have more pollution. And that is something that's transformative. But I needed to show to Canadians that it wasn't just environmentalists that supported me, that business supported me. So I created a carbon pricing leadership coalition with leading businesses who stepped up and said, this is actually good for my business, because it will make it cheaper for me to choose less polluting solutions. And I think what Johan says is really important. We need folks to step up, but it can't be, you know, if a business steps up, they're going to do less well. And so we did a report with a high-level expert group 2 years ago to the UN Secretary General. I chaired it. It was called Integrity Matters. So there's a price of admission. You say you're going to be net zero. It's not about 2050, although you need a 2050 target, but you need to be doing the work now. And we set out the criteria, which is, you know, good companies are doing this. We did a progress report this year with the UN Secretary General, where we brought together key actors, so from the private sector, and they showed that, you know, it's no longer an excuse to say that you can't move faster on the climate crisis because it's too difficult or too expensive. But the reality is not everyone is actually implementing this. And this is where you need government and companies working together. So next year is critical. We do need to see more ambitious climate plans, but with details from governments, because business needs certainty. They need to see where the market is going. And that can happen, and governments can provide that. But at the same time, the Secretary General at our event was clear, we need to see new ambitious transition plans to 2030 next year from companies. They need to step up and say what they're doing, because you want an ambition loop. You want governments to be setting the stage, how do we move forward? And then you want companies to be leading the way. And one thing I will say, because obviously there's a lot of focus on Trump, at our event, we had Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, but I was at another event with California. They're all in. And so you cannot stop the energy transition. The question is, how do we get the exponential change that we need right now? And we need governments to regulate and step up and provide, you know, the policy that is necessary. And we need businesses to scale both action and money.
Thank you very much, Catherine McKenna. And Johan Rockström, just a few days ago, you co-published an op-ed in one of the leading newspapers in Sweden, Dagens Nyheter, where you mentioned policy diffusion. Can you please tell us about this and how this relates to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so, you know, it comes out of a rising recognition of that speed and scale are the only currencies that count. So social tipping points and social contagion is something we have to understand better. What is it that makes us go exponential in terms of system change, not at the local level, not at the national level, but at the regional to the global level? And we focus a lot on you know, Roger Everett's 1962 theory of the diffusion of innovation and the cutting point of when you penetrate an innovation up to 20% of markets, you can actually tip over the 80% passive part of the market. So this is the innovation pathway. But there's increasingly evidence also to show that you can have the same kind of spillover effects on policies, where good examples of transparent, objective, effective policymaking in one economy can be reference points and poster childs for behaviors that then can spill over. And one very classic example, of course, is look at the European emission trading scheme. Where does that whole idea of cap and trade on a market-based cap, where you put a cap on emissions and then you basically have a market-based system? Well, it came from California. And it was a policy diffusion from one part of the world, which then spilled over into a completely different part of the world. I mean, we could have chosen simple carbon taxing as was done in the Nordics, for example. So this idea of learning from each other, which suggests the following, that even if you're in a small economy in the world, even if you are in Switzerland or in Colombia or in Finland or in Vietnam, you can actually have a disproportionately large influence today because everything is shaking. We are in the midst, as Catherine points out, we're in the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel-driven global economy. The question is not whether we will phase off coal, oil, and gas. The only question today is, will we be too late? We will be too late for this to have unmanageable outcomes. And we're in the midst of this gauntlet. This is the transition phase. 150 years of powering in one way is to be replaced by another way. Of course, this is messy. And in this messiness, everyone is looking for the good examples. So you can be a leader today if you are, in Sweden or in New Zealand, in Germany or in China. I mean, the scale, I think we're focusing too much on the size of emitters. I think we should look more at the size of cleverness and innovation and novelty, and looking at that also when it comes to policies is equally important as innovation of technologies.
Thank you, Johan Rockström. This is truly inspiring, and I hope politicians are listening. I'm sure they will be, because this is really sizes and all in this. It's really the great examples that are important. So, Catherine McKenna, do you have any comments on this?
I mean, look, Johan is 100% right. In Canada, actually, when we had a government that was going back on climate, it was our provinces that stepped up and put a price on pollution, did a bunch of other things, methane regulations, a bunch of things that we were able to build on as a federal government when we came in. We saw this when Trump won, became the first time. We saw states really step up, as well as businesses, investors, cities and regions. But I think that we did, so as part of the Integrity Matters process, our 10th recommendation, we only had 10, was you need to regulate. And so there was a policy task force, a net zero policy task force that I'm part of. And it did a report this year, and it actually showed that there's a lot of policy innovation going on. Its focus this year was actually just do a comprehensive look at policy in the net zero space. I think the next agenda is to do, and Johan is always so smart, because I think what we need to do is the Integrity Matters, like our task force, needs to be working with the policy task force and look at examples of where policy innovation or diffusion has made a difference in the real economy, and what can we learn from that. So what is it when you see, say, like IKEA, who is really a leader? They've been able to demonstrate that you can both grow and reduce your emissions and make money. That's what we need to be showing, that you can decouple emissions from growth, ideally, because that's for governments as well as businesses. I think we need to see what is the interaction and what is really making the big exponential difference. I agree with Johan. I only care about scale and speed, and we don't have time. So when people tell me about their net zero 2050 targets, I don't really care. I'm like, what are you doing right now? Are your emissions going down? Is your money going up to clean? Do you have the right incentives in place? Are you lobbying for positive climate action from your government and policy that you need to actually do what you can do? And are you doing things that other people can learn from? So I think that there's actually a huge opportunity in this space, but it requires thinking a bit differently. For environmentalists, I think that we need to be more strategic in really figuring out, okay, what makes the big difference and what can people build on, and where can we learn from unusual suspects? I was always scavenging on the good ideas globally and locally in Canada to be able to do more on climate.
Thank you, Catherine McKenna. So Johan Falk, scavenging and speed and scale, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we can talk about exponential policies as well. Basically, I think there is an opportunity to actually identify and scale winning policies, the vital few, not overcomplicated. You can easily see, let's say Norway, for example, how did they achieve 90%? It's about relative pricing. It's about providing particular incentives, so that these type of strategies could be copied. So I think there could be work there on actually scaling policies much faster.
Thank
and
you.
Going for the vital few policies.
So all three of you, your thoughts on how we can go from sharing of burdens perspective to more an exponential race. Can you add any more perspectives, any more layers to this? Johan Rockström?
Yeah, I think this is really challenging, that your point about sharing burdens. I mean, I think one of the big breakthrough challenges we have is how do we make the phase out of coal, oil and gas, the whole mitigation agenda, a winning agenda also for the global south, a winning agenda for the weakest economies in the world. And because today we are at this unnecessary defense line between those who are perceiving themselves rightly as victims of climate change and therefore sitting in a state of inertia, when we need to get all economies on board this innovation pathway. And I think the only way to succeed with that is to add one element to the discussion we have here. So far we've discussed about scale and speed through innovation, solutions that give better outcomes. But we also need to de-risk investment. And of course that comes to the whole Baku discussion on finance. But in my view, finance cannot only be about compensating for loss and damage. Finance must be about de-risking innovations towards the new economy of tomorrow. And I think that storyline, unfortunately, is still too much on the sideline. It needs to become much more central, in my view.
Thank you. Catherine McKenna, any thoughts on this?
Look, I totally agree. I used to live in Indonesia and I was in Singapore. They have a big conference, Ecosperity, and just talking to the Indonesian minister, and he said, like, we need like support to actually get the projects off the ground, but it can't be that I'm paying a massive premium to borrow money, as opposed, like, I don't need your bad rates, interest rates. I can go get them myself. And so I think we need to be creative, but this is going to require governments digging deep. I see this even in Canada, where folks are like, well, it's hard enough for us at home. Well, we're actually a really rich country and we've benefited greatly from the burning of fossil fuels. And this is a global problem. We're not solving this if we don't figure this out. But I always say to the finance folks, like, I'm not a finance folk. I'm like a reformed politician and a reformed lawyer and now doing work on the policy side. But there are smart people who can figure out how to scale capital to developing countries and address for risk, whether it's currency risk. I think we overestimate political risk in many of these countries, but we need to get the trillions going. This is about scale. So of course we need governments stepping up, and grant money can help leverage private capital. So can World Bank money and Development Bank money, which is not being used as effectively as it could. But I just think we don't have time. And so really smart people have to focus on solutions, not sitting in meetings and having endless conversations about blended finance. And I think we really need to be very granular. Like, countries have ideas about what they need to do. In Canada, it was very hard phasing out coal. We had to go to communities and listen to people who were angry. And we needed to hear what they needed. They wanted investments in infrastructure. They wanted early retirement. They wanted retraining. They wanted opportunities for those communities. That's normal. That's exactly what normal people want. So as a global community, we can't go tell countries like Indonesia or Vietnam or South Africa, you've got to get off coal, but we're not worried about the transition for workers. We're just worried about how we go from coal to renewables. It won't work that way, but people are smart. We have, as I hear from finance, there's loads of money around the world. We just need to figure out ways to channel it very quickly and effectively to support politicians that are committed to doing hard things, but they can't do it if people don't have jobs, if people don't have opportunities, and if they don't get the money necessary for the transition.
Thank you, Catherine McKenna. Would you like to add anything, Johan Falk?
I think regulation will now push, basically most companies to disclose transition plans as well as countries. And you can start by doing a transition plan like a tick in a box, but when it really becomes sufficient is when you integrate in your business plan and what the countries will integrate in their financial plans. So I foresee if we can achieve that critical mass of all these actors, we can achieve a positive tipping point up to COP30. So that should be our objective.
Well, thank you very much, Johan Falk, and thank you, Catherine McKenna. And I'd like to ask Johan Rockström to stay on for the next panel. Now let's move on. So welcome to the second half of this panel. We're going to talk about how we can scale solutions to drastically cut methane emissions. In parallel, of course, to accelerating our efforts, of course, to cut carbon emissions and also, of course, to phase out fossil fuels. And Johan Rockström is still with us, and also I'm joined by Ingmar Rentzhog, CEO and co-founder of We Don't Have Time. And also still is, of course, Johan Rockström. So Ingmar, We Don't Have Time, an Exponential Roadmap Initiative, has co-launched this campaign called Buy More Time. What is the mission of this campaign? Can you please tell the viewers, and why have you focused so much on this during COP29?
The reason why we started this Buy More Time campaign is to give some concrete solution to the difficult situation we are in the world politics. We have all the solution we need in order to decarbonize the society. It's going to happen. I'm totally convinced. But the problem is it going to happen fast enough? And quite recently, The Guardian did a big survey among people working in climate, and only 6% believes that we're going to be able to halve the emission before 2030. That is what we must do in order to avoid a lot of tipping points and all that. So Buy More Time is about to continue doing everything we can to decarbonize the society, but by also focusing on short-lived climate gases, we can actually get more time to do everything else, because the difference between short-lived climate gases such as methane and others compared to carbon dioxide, they only is up in the atmosphere for a short time, a couple of years, maybe up to 10, 12 years, instead of up to 1,000 years with carbon dioxide. And that means that if we don't need to remove them from the atmosphere, we can stop emit them. And it's also that it's kind of low-hanging fruits. There's a lot of methane emission that is really easy to fix. And previously we haven't known about them, but now we have the satellite data, so it's easy to fix those emission and kind of low-hanging fruit to cut emission faster. So Buy More Time is actually a pathway to succeed with the halving emission for 2030, and that's why we're focusing on it. But it's not doing it instead of cutting carbon. We need to do both.
It's important to emphasize the latter, of course. So Johan Rockström, you have been part of the initiative, starting the initiative, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, together with Johan Falk and also Owen Gaffney. So could you please tell us the scientific, the benefits of cutting these super pollutants out of the atmosphere, and how this is related to what we spoke about earlier in the previous panel too?
Yes, so to just give you a little quick, let's say, deep dive into the lab, so to say, into the cutting edge of science and what really concerns us right now. So emitting greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide is the most dominant gas, 70%, but then we have the big warming non-CO2 gases of methane, nitrous oxide, and then we have the black carbon and the cooling aerosols, and of course all the chlorofluorocarbons. And what we see as a trend line over the past 10 years is a big shift in the climate forcing caused by these greenhouse gases on the energy imbalance on planet Earth, which causes the warming. Up until 2010, you could see that the warming forcing by non-CO2 gases were cancelled out by cooling gases from air pollution. So essentially, up until 2010, the energy imbalance, the whole global heating was net caused by carbon dioxide. But from 2010 onwards, something happens. Methane increases faster than before 2010, and aerosols reduce faster than we had expected, which is really positive because the aerosols are air pollutants in cities. So these are sulfates and nitrates causing or explaining the premature death of 8 to 9 million people per year. So we're cleaning up the air in the cities, but we're not getting off fossil fuels. And not only that, methane is increasing faster than in previous times. So over the past 10 years, climate forcing has jumped up very rapidly. So we are today at a level of energy imbalance, which I think is the strongest candidate why we experience such an extremely warm temperature rise over the past 10 years, an increasing rate of warming. We have actually crashed through 1.5 degrees Celsius if you look at the last 12-month period. This is not only a super El Nino, it's more than that. There's something more than that, and I think it has to do exactly with this topic of the importance of getting off the non-CO2 gases as well. So the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, if anything, over the past 10 years have been proven to be even more important than we previously thought. I mean, we know that the global carbon budget, which has been our focus, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative of cutting emissions by half every decade and reaching net zero by 2050, is all about carbon dioxide. It's that we're running out of time to stay within the carbon budget. But there is an additional budget, which is the non-CO2 gases, which are also causing havoc by emphasizing or accelerating warming rather than canceling out through cooling. And this is what we need to also recognize as point of urgency.
Thank you. So Ingmar Rentzhog, you're proposing you would like to see a Montreal protocol for super pollutants. Why?
First, we have had lately quite a lot of pledges to reduce methane. At COP29 and yesterday actually it was 35 countries including Russia and the United Arab Emirates and some others that pledged to reduce methane. But we know also that those pledges are seldom executed. So I think we need to create legal binding agreement. And the Montreal Protocol was something that worked quite differently from the Paris Agreement. Montreal Protocol in 1987, 46 nations agreed to start phasing out freons that were hurting the ozone layer. And they agreed on this, it was legally binding, and they had a phase-out plan. And now 200 countries have signed the Montreal Protocol, and the ozone layer are actually healing. So the Montreal Protocol, the reason why it worked, it was so much easier to agree on phasing out freons, because the industry had alternatives. It was not as big as, the energy source powering our society. But if you see methane and other short-lived climate gases, often it's just a byproduct. It's like the waste. So by focusing on, we mean that you can do something similar where you actually get rid of those. And it's very interesting now that 130 countries have pledged to reduce quite fast methane emissions. So why can't we have those 130 countries, including many oil countries? That is interesting because this is not their main thing. Can't we have them to agree on some similar thing like the Montreal Protocol? We don't need to start with 200 countries, we just need to start with all the countries that already have agreed on pledging to do it. So the Montreal Protocol, something similar, go from pledges to legal binding agreement.
Thank you, Ingmar Rentzhog. Johan Rockström, what are your thoughts on this suggestion?
No, I agree with Ingmar. I think it's a good suggestion. And by the way, I think it's a good suggestion also in relation to the panel discussion we had previously here, that the Montreal Protocol is a policy diffusion example. It's a successful, legally binding global framework where a minority of countries in the world had a phase-out plan, and that spilled over to all the countries in the world. And doing something similar for methane and for nitrous oxide, for example, as non-CO2 gases, would definitely be both beneficial, because I think it can remind the world that the only way to get off carbon dioxide from phasing out coal, oil, and gas is also phase out plans. I'm very worried that we have created a legally binding framework in the Paris Agreement with voluntary national NDCs, which are not where countries are not held accountable. In the Montreal Protocol, countries are held accountable. So I think that is in itself kind of an interesting way of trying to push forward on the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, Rockström. Any thoughts on how we could make this actually happen?
Well, you may have seen that we have proposed a COP reform letter that created a bit of noise in Baku. This letter sent to Simon Steele and the leadership of UNFCCC has only one purpose, which is to strengthen the COP, not to weaken the COP. We want to make the COP start to deliver on all, as Ingmar says, we have so many pledges and so many commitments on methane, on afforestation, on adaptation, on loss and damage, on 1.5 degrees Celsius, on transitioning away from fossil fuels. I mean, everything that is necessary to solve this problem is in place, legally in place. It's not perfect, but it's in place. So I think that is the key issue here, is to recognize that we need to reform what the COP meeting is all about, and have more discussions on, or focus on accounting against phase-out plans, which where countries are held accountable.
Thank you, Johan Rockström. And before we conclude this session here, I have a final question to you that's related to your part in the documentary Climate Extremes, where you're one of the climate experts. Can you please tell us about this documentary?
Yeah, well, to begin with, and I see that my dear friend David Wallerstein is online here. It comes out of a sense of frustration, to be honest. David and I have been meeting over the years, and he rightly reminds us in the science community that, look here, you have such an enormous untapped potential. You're kind of underperforming on communication. You're sitting on all this evidence and all this top relevant information, which needs to reach out in a much broader way. And that was what triggered this idea of experimenting with really fast science visualization and getting it out to the world in a new way of communicating. And I'm very much in support of that. We need to go viral in a much more prominent way with the truth, because we are unfortunately in a world full of troll industries and misinformation and manipulation on so many of the information highways in the world that it's an information war out there, and we need to play the game.
Thank you very much, Johan. And we're going to return to this documentary at the end of this session. We're going to have an interview broadcasted with the director of the film. But first, let's watch your presentation of the Buy More Time campaign, Ingmar Rentzhog. And thank you very much, Johan Rockström, for joining us here today.
This is the climate crisis today. We're kind of leaning backwards. And the more emission we put up there, the more we're leaning it. But we can still do this, right? The problem, if we pass 1.5 degree, and we're very near, we're kind of there, but if we stay there and we just keep going up, there is a big risk of hitting a tipping point. And when we hit a tipping point, this share will be very hard to put back up. So this is what we must avoid for the climate. And we have a cure for this. The only thing we need in order to make it is more time. We need to buy more time. And now we feel the resistance from the politicians. But when we're up here, they will not resist the green transition, because the green transition are the majority. So the policy will change when the technology changes, but we need more time. So how can we get more time? The problem with carbon dioxide, when we emit it, it will go up. And it will stay up there for up to 1,000 years. Maybe we can kind of try to remove it, but it looks kind of hard to do it, very expensive. Methane is another greenhouse gas. It's a very common greenhouse gas. It's the second biggest contributor to global warming. And there's a big difference between methane and carbon dioxide. When we release this, it comes down again. On average, 12 years. It's a big difference between 1,000 years, 12 years. So the solution here is that we need to stop emit methane. And if we do that, we can actually reverse global warming with up to 0.5 degrees. That is the time we need to do everything else, because we still need to stop the carbon dioxide. So this is great news. And where does this methane come from? This is one of the sources. Bananas. Waste, food waste. 20% of methane emission comes from waste. But guess what? When I arrived here this morning, I took the bus, and the bus in Sweden, in Stockholm, are powered with bioenergy. We don't emit hardly any methane from waste. So other countries can do the same. 45% from methane comes from the fossil fuel industry. And this is a lot of emission that is really easy to fix. It's just fix the pipe. Cows are burping 4 times every 5 minutes. Agriculture adds up to 40% of the methane emissions. Many companies working on this, where you have a food additive, and you give that to the cows, and they burp up to 80% less. So what do we need? We need to look at the fridge. All the fridges we had when I was a kid were powered by a dangerous gas. And when that was released up in the air, it was destroying the ozone layer. If we hadn't fixed it, we will not be able to walk outside today and show naked skin. But we're not doing that, because the industry, the manufacturers of the fridges, the chemical companies, and bold world leaders met in Montreal, where they decided to ban freons, phase it out, put the funding behind it, and today we have perfectly fresh food and we don't use freon anymore. Isn't it great? It saved humanity once, so we can do it twice. And there is one more thing. This year in Mars, there was a new satellite launched that is called the methane satellite. And it will measure open data where we have emission from methane, leakage, and we will know exactly where we need to fix the problem. We don't have that for any other climate gases, but we have it for methane. So a legal system, some funding, and the data is everything we need. And this is what Buy More Time is all about. We can do this.
So we have talked about how countries and companies can and must increase their effort to help make it easier for solutions to scale exponentially. One who knows more about this than most people, especially from the company perspective, is María Mendiluce. And we're very happy that María is with us here via Zoom. And María Mendiluce is CEO of the We Mean Business Coalition. So wonderful to have you join us, María Mendiluce. How are you today?
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
So María, you've been listening to the two panels. What are your thoughts?
It's really interesting. It's always very inspiring to talk with Johan. But both Johan and Catherine McKenna, now the video was very, very telling. One of the things that that first stick in my mind is this thing about winning the narrative for citizens. Because there's so much information and disinformation out there. Citizens believe that the transition to a clean economy is more expensive, but actually it's not. And it is how do we make sure that they also benefit from the fact that it's less expensive. It is also another thing that I thought it was really interesting is this concept of diffusing the policies that work and how that can create some policy tipping points. The European trading system, carbon pricing, is a fantastic example. Now, as I was in COP last week in Baku, where you are, I spoke to the UK government and they were telling me how they're going to come about to phase out fossil fuels from power generation. And it was all about planning the phase out and planning the phasing. Apparently there are 8,000 gigawatts on the pipeline of renewable energy, which are not needed because we need to replace fossil fuels. To replace fossil fuels, we need to plan that transition so that people move from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, from gas heating to air to heat pumps. And that can be done, if done with good planning, it can bring communities along. And that's the third element that I thought was interesting, is the concept of the just transition, right? So the just transition is about how do you bring the workers that have been working on the fossil fuel industry to benefit from the transition, to reskill and to look at the future with much more optimism. And yeah, clearly those three things are really important.
Thank you, Maria. The We Mean Business Coalition really tries to embolden the policymakers to listen to the business community to make stronger climate policies. So do the policymakers listen to you?
Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I think they listen to many, and that's rightly so. Last year, we did put forward a campaign that it was called Fossil to Clean, where we rallied companies. There were 260 companies that sent a letter to policymakers asking for fossil fuel phase out to be included in the text. We had transition away from fossil fuels, which is a fantastic way to address this. And I have to say that when I was at COP last week, I heard countries looking at how they're going to implement the three things: tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and transition away from fossil fuels. So that was a good win. Not all the companies, would agree with that, but I think the ones that we want to work with, the ones that want to progress on this agenda, the ones that are committed, are pushing for this to happen, and they need the policy frameworks, they need that planning, that permitting, they need, the regulatory frameworks to do so. So I think sometimes they listen. I think often they do. I think often they want to validate what they're doing and see whether the business are supportive, and that's where we are. Also, it means that sometimes we're not supportive, right? Because it needs to make business sense, okay? So it's not about supporting everything policymakers are doing, but pushing together for greater ambition and for solutions to some of the barriers that business face.
So Maria, just a few days here at the COP, when you were actually physically here, the We Mean Business Coalition coordinated a statement that was directed to the G20 leaders and forcing and pushing for stronger action in Rio. So could you please tell us about this statement?
Well, yes, because we saw that the negotiations in Baku were a little stalled. And because we are dealing with something that is very complex, which is the financing, it requires the G20 countries to step in and to push for further and bigger ambition, because we know that at the end there will be, the G20 countries are the ones that are going to deliver some of this funding to the poorest countries that don't meet G20. So I think that's what it was needed. We also called for them to push for more text on the transition away from fossil fuels. We were not happy that it was not included, although it was referenced through the reference to the UA consensus. I think we have to look at these things at the mirror. We need to triple renewables, but we also need to reduce the use of fossil fuels. If not, the emissions will continue to grow. So as I say there, and I continue to say, the best way to address climate change is to stop burning fossil fuels. So let's make sure that all the NDCs that are coming forward include elements on how they're going to stop that and replace it with clean energies.
So Maria Mendiluce, would you say that this COP is just a transition to Rio, or is it really, what is the importance of this COP from your perspective?
I think from my perspective, there are two things that are important. The first one is that we need to have a good finance deal. We need to support developing countries and the poor countries so that they can do the transition and prepare to the impacts from climate change. The second thing is that this is the COP where we're starting to hear from countries about their NDCs, the headline number, the ambition that they're going to include on those NDCs, and that the NDCs from both the UK and Brazil gave a very good signal to other countries what is required. But it's not only the NDC and that figure, it is the plans that go with it that business are interested to. So I think that from now until the next COP, we need to work on those. That truly is going to be the investment plan of the countries. That's how they're going to attract massive amounts of funding. And so we need to help countries develop plans that are investable. we could make those entities investable.
Well, thank you very much indeed, María Mendiluce, CEO of the WeBIM Business Coalition, for your important work and for also your reflections here on the previous two panels and your fantastic work. Best of luck,
Thank
and we'll see you. I hope to see you again.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now let's move on to not move on, but we're going to talk about the climate extremes at the abyss, which is a documentary that explores critical tipping points and also the non-linear dynamics shaping our climate's future. And the Professor Johan Rockström, who was just on our broadcast, he is one of the experts featured in this film. So we will now watch a few snippets from this important film, and after this watching we will have a conversation. I'm going to be able to interview the creator, director and producer of this documentary, and his name is David Wallerstein. So please enjoy the snippets, and then we're going to go into the interview.
The difference between today and tomorrow's weather, wherever we're sitting at the moment, is probably more than 1.5 degrees centigrade. So you might ask, what's the big deal? But to put that into perspective, the difference between today and the last ice age, when there were even thousands of feet of ice overlying places where there are today major cities in the Northern Hemisphere, is just a handful of degrees centigrade. The range of warming that we've already surpassed or are on track to meet in the coming decades is just this massive, geologically significant amount of warming, and that usually takes many thousands of years to occur, but something that we're going to see in less than a century, and literally within an individual human lifespan.
So the Holocene is a warm interglacial. It is a 14 degrees Celsius planet. It's inside this corridor of life, the +2 maximum warmth to -6, but it's even more narrow. It's actually 14 degrees Celsius plus minus 0.5. So already today, at 1.45, we are actually almost a magnitude 3 times outside of the warmest temperature on Earth since we left the last ice age. I mean, 1.5 is a very big number. When we burn oil, coal, and gas and emit greenhouse gases, that causes a massive energy imbalance on planet Earth. But what happens with the planet is that the response is that the ocean takes up heat, ice sheets take up heat when they melt. 50% of all the carbon dioxide is absorbed in oceans and natural systems on land. And all these interactions is what explains when we push these systems too far, that they can flip over from the current state that buffers in a very effective way to lose that capacity.
Some of the rain that falls and makes it a rainforest that keeps the Amazon moist is essentially recycled. But if any part of that process, that self-reinforcing constructive feedback cycle, becomes interrupted, then the whole thing can suddenly start to fall apart.
When you cross a tipping point, you self-amplify warming, and the warming leads to even more extreme events. So there's a very strong, unfortunate, vicious relationship between tipping points and extreme events. For every 1/10 of a degree that increases, you get more frequent and more fierce droughts, heat waves, floods, strengthened hurricanes, more disease patterns, more fires. That is quite linear, and it's a fast variable. It happens very fast, continuously, across the world, and it hits fast.
We know that the water vapor holding capacity of the atmosphere increases by about 7% per degree centigrade of warming. That means that every time you have an additional degree of warming or fraction of degree of warming, the degree to which the atmosphere can hold water vapor increased by a greater amount than the last time you warmed by that degree.
Very strong and fascinating, and of course, very important content. In these snippets. So I'm very honored and pleased to have with us here on our broadcast the creator, director, and producer of Climate Extremes, David Wallerstein. So wonderful to have you with us here on Zoom. And you're joining us from where?
Thank you for having me. I'm here from Europe. Yeah, thank you very much.
And you're based in California. Are you joining us from California?
Yeah, no, not today. Yeah, I'm in Iceland today.
Okay, great. So David, every journey has its beginning. So could you please tell us how you started this project?
Well, it really came out of a lot of discussions with scientists over the years and feeling in our discussions that there was a lot of information and ideas in their minds that wasn't really making it to the public domain. We've learned a lot about climate change in the past 20 years. And I think even wherever you stand in terms of how you want to participate in the climate fight, people have a general understanding of some of the dynamics of climate, but I felt that so many other ideas and the complexity of our planet was not really getting through to the public. And so the question is, how do you really quickly get more messages and ideas out into the public domain? And I felt that the best way to get more messaging out there would be to do a very quick documentary. So documentaries can take a long time. My goal was to do something within months, have it finished and then delivered to the public within a couple months, because as the topic of today, we don't have the time. So I've made documentaries sometimes that have taken years to finish and get distributed. And I felt we needed something that could be made quickly, finished quickly, and delivered to the public immediately over YouTube. Actually, it's a free film over YouTube. So you don't have to request permission from others or schedule launch dates on YouTube. You control everything yourself, and it happens immediately, as is the power of social media. So that was the idea behind the film.
This is great. So David, what was the hardest part of getting this documentary done?
Well, actually, I want to thank our team. I'm a co-director of the film with someone named Johan Gudjonsson, and we have Irim Biller as our associate producer, and there was an animator named Mustafa. I can't remember his last name at the moment, sorry. But anyways, getting those animations sufficiently right. I mean, they're just conceptual, so any scientist could look at them and say, well, you missed this and that there. I mean, that's the nature of drawing, a high-level concept through an animation. But, being able to match what the scientists were saying with a visual as they're talking, that was very important to get right, and it's not easy. We were fortunate to find a great animator in Mustafa to do it quickly, but I think that was quite challenging, because really the film is very elegant. I want to say how we did it to maybe inspire other filmmakers out there, because it's not really complicated. We spent a day or two at Potsdam, the Potsdam Institute, with Johan and his team, and we spent a day or so at ECMWF, the European Weather Forecasting Agency there. And we're talking like 1 or 2 days of filming, and then there was plenty of editing going along, but the editing can move fast with putting in stock footage that you get online from all the online sites. And then the animation was what really took time, to blend that in, and that takes someone really, working with their hands, I believe, to add those animations to the film. But really, it's a very elegant process. Without the animations, I think the whole thing could have been done in like 45 days or something like that. So, or maybe even less, a team could work faster. And I think that's necessary now to get more complex ideas about climate and Earth behavior, planetary behavior out into the public domain, to help people understand more what we're really dealing with here with all of these climate challenges.
So David, how has the documentary been received so far?
Yeah, well, I think it's been very well. Thank you. It's been out for about 3 weeks. We have about 440,000 views. Very good, and some good likes going along with it, and some good reviews on IMDb. But it's not enough. We're targeting 8 billion people, one way or the other. By the way, we saw that over half the users actually watched the film on television, which was very interesting to me. I was envisioning everyone using their phone or maybe a laptop or something, but actually most people watch it on a TV, which is great. But you don't have to watch it on TV. You can watch it on your phone. You can watch it on a laptop. We really want, as many people as possible, even if you're not interested in climate and you don't think you care about these issues. There's a lot of people like that in the world. We have to be very aware of those who are not yet really engaged in these topics. That was a key concern. How do we address all of them? We tried to make a film that imagined someone not being interested in these topics, not being sympathetic, and they come across this content, and do they keep watching or not? And we wanted to make it really a dialogue from the scientists directly to the viewer, and hopefully they'll be interested to hear what the scientists have to say in their own language. It's only the scientists discussing how the Earth behaves now, and it is expected to behave in the future, and has behaved over actually millennia. Johan has a very interesting description of how the Earth has evolved over millions of years, which I think is also very interesting for anyone to understand that. Most people don't think about it, but we need to think about it more, because we are now pushing ourselves in a position where we're going to start changing the dynamics of Earth. And we've had ice ages. I think everyone generally acknowledges things like that. And now we're pushing ourselves into new directions where you see transformation on Earth, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much, David, for doing this important work and for coming out into our studio today. And if all of you viewers here, you can watch. Of course, you can watch the full documentary here on We Don't Have Time. So you just go to wedon'thavetime.org/COP29 and you click on the November 20 day, that's today, and you scroll down all the way down to the gray boxes with the title sessions, and you can play it on demand. And you can also find and rewatch all our sessions here from COP29, as well as all our one-on-one interviews with special guests here and other great climate content. So thank you again, David. And now we're going to hear from some very interesting guests that we have been interviewing during the days here at COP27. We're getting tired here, the second last day. COP29 here in Baku, in our studio and also outside in the media center. And we'll be back with some live broadcasting at 6 p.m. local time here in Baku. So please enjoy the interviews, and thank you again, David Wallerstein. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.